Hop Nation. I'm very excited to have a special guest today, Luke Pierce. Welcome, Luke.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Appreciate you having me on here.
No, it's been great. I know we've been talking about doing something like this for a while, so I'm glad that you were able to make the time to make this happen. For the benefit of the listeners, Luke, I'd like to just read a bit of your bio, and then we'll hear a little more detail about this as we get into it, okay?
Sounds good.
Awesome. So Luke is the assistant coach with the WHL's Edmonton Oil Kings since 2018. He's the former head coach with the WHL's Kootenay Ice and BC Hockey League's Merritt Centennials. He's a silver medalist as the assistant coach of the Canadian Para Ice Hockey team at the 2018 Olympics in Korea. He's a graduate of Canada's Royal Military College with an MBA and BA in psychology. Outside of coaching, Luke serves as the vice president and chairman of the board for Hockey Gives Blood. And most importantly, he's a parent of 3 boys along with his lovely wife, Amy. So welcome, and thank you very much for taking time right now, Luke.
No, it's an honor, Corey, to be on. I had a chance to look through some of your previous guests, and it's truly a privilege to be here.
Well, thank
sharing
you.
the same space as some of them. So really excited.
Yeah, well, you're an elite performer yourself, and you work with a lot of elite athletes being part of the national hockey program, as well as obviously as your role as a coach within the Western Hockey League. Tell me a bit about how you get to this stage. I always like to ask that founder story. There was a path that got you into this current role and passion for elite level performance. What was that for you?
Yeah, I love your terminology of founder story. I would call it my founder's adventure. It's been a phenomenal adventure for in the beginning myself, and then to have a companion join me along the way, and the adventure that Amy and I have had with our children. Obviously a lot of it centers around hockey, and where I started growing up in a small town in Merritt, and I think there's a great combination for people from small towns. I think we have a little bit of ignorance and a little bit naive to what the big world is like, and that keeps us maybe from being intimidated from chasing some kind of a dream. So for me, I never saw any disadvantages of being from small town, and played junior hockey in British Columbia and Merritt, and both in Vernon, and I was lucky. I had an older brother that went and explored the East Coast, went to university in the Boston area and played hockey there. For him, it was just such a cool experience to be in a different part of the world, especially coming from a small town in British Columbia. So I always wanted to go and do that. And relationships and contacts is what led me out to the Royal Military College, and not something that I knew a lot about heading out there as far as the military goes, but it was a chance to continue playing hockey, a chance to be involved in leadership. Financially, it was attractive, and a chance to go and experience that Eastern Canada and another part of the world, and start that adventure. So I always kind of knew, I think, that coaching was something I wanted to do. I remember having a conversation as a 20-year-old with my coach at the time, and he was the one who really pushed me to go and do my education first, and if I still felt that burning desire to come back to it. So there was a point there during that adventure where I thought, you start to get through doing my MBA, especially, you start to see some of the, the pull to go into that financial world. And I think we're all a little hungry for that, the financial gain at that age. But it just timing and again, relationships. There was an opening in Merritt back in my hometown to get into coaching, and it just seemed like a fit, and I went after it, and spent 6 years there, which I thought was, wasn't going to take nearly as long for me to advance. And again, that goes back to the ignorance piece of, being a little naive, and then again, relationship that got me into an opportunity in Kootenay to be a head coach, and real great learning curve there, and throughout that time, I keep using the word relationship, but it keeps coming back to that. I'd made some great contacts and relationships with guys at Hockey Canada, and involved, and I had an off year and was available just at the right time in 2018, and they asked me to join them for the Pyeonchang Paralympics with the sledge team, and that was a life-changing experience for me. And now I'm here in Edmonton and grateful to be here and working with a phenomenal staff and a group of people having success again, and really enjoying my role here.
Yeah, phenomenal success for, the whole coaching team was changed in 2018. And, before this interruption with COVID cut things short, you guys were, winning your division, and you were trending in the right way and peaking at the right time. So you talked about the Olympics and with the Paralympic sledge hockey team being a life-changing experience. What was life-changing about that for you?
Well, I at the time, so we struggled in Kootenay. My first job in the Western Hockey League as a head coach, and I was 32. I was the youngest coach in the Western Hockey League when I got hired, and coaches in Kootenay had been on this trajectory for years where everybody had success, and to me, it was natural. I was going to go there. I was going to succeed, and the rest was going to be history, and join a long list of successful guys. And there were a lot of circumstances out of your control, as there always is. But for me, failed there, and there was an ownership change, and they let me go, and I was bitter. Probably to the point where I didn't know if coaching was what I wanted to do, but didn't know what else to do. And going to work with the Paralympic athletes. So I spent the year with them leading up to the games, and the first day there was just mind blowing. I mean, these guys are, whether they're military veterans who'd lost a limb, or they're guys who suffered birth defects, or they've had amputations from accidents or paralysis. And they would show up to the rink with the greatest attitudes, determination, work ethic. Like, I've told people, if you could ever take that drive, determination, and put it into able-bodied hockey players, you would never lose a game. And it was humbling, because I was sitting there going, like, I felt so selfish that I had been bitter and, mad about my situation. And yet here these guys are that they loved life, and they had every reason to be jilted or disappointed or mad at the world. And I'm sure they had their own struggles at times too, but as an outsider and being around them on a daily basis, going through their training and watching them peak as we headed to Paralympics in Korea, like, I will never take for granted, my health and some of the situations that I'm fortunate to be in. And, I took a brand new lease on, getting back into the game and being in a different role. I'd never been an assistant coach prior to doing that. And that's been phenomenal for me to just be able to try and help serve other people. And I thank, those athletes and the staff at Hockey Canada for that opportunity to get me back on track.
Yeah, and it's phenomenal, because there's a few things I hear in that. One, working with the Paralympic team and the challenges they face, but they're still as high performance at any Olympian is such a amazing dedication and sacrifice they have to give. And to do that with additional challenges of, whatever the physical challenge is that makes them a Paralympian. I had a mother who was in a car accident, became a quad. So, I've been around the environment and with adaptive sports, worked with the guys with the Blind Hockey League, Mark. So I've seen it. But the other piece that resonated is the role of adversity, as you went through this amazing opportunity that you saw in Kootenay, and then for things outside your control, like an ownership change. And like with most ownership changes in elite level sports, they want to put their own stamp. They're bringing in their own people. So there's a change there. It looked like a negative, but when you can look back with 20/20 vision, when you're in it, it hurts in the moment. But I know with any of those major life-changing things that were a major suck, what happens in behind that, when I hear the story and where it's led you, sometimes we don't see it in the moment, but that adversity has set us up for something better and shaped our character. So what have you learned from adversity and its role in elite level performance?
Well, I think that's a major area right now that we need to try and encourage and make people, not necessarily athletes, but parents especially, understand the importance of adversity in performance, because we're really trying to pave the way for kids and athletes and create an adversity-less environment for them, and with all good intentions, but really not helping. And I read a great quote the other day about it's about preparing them for the path, and it's not about preparing the path for them. So, if you think about, we sell ourselves short. Like for me, I look at Kootenay and say that was my greatest adversity and the first time I'd really faced it. But in reality, I'd had several things throughout my upbringing that were great examples of adversity. I mean, we lost our house to a house fire and got nothing out of it other than, we lost our 2 dogs. We lost everything. And I was, 15, but in hindsight, like, it was a great thing for us to realize how trivial possession and things like that are. So you can continue to then, I think what adversity allows you to really do is take stock of what matters and, maybe simplify some things a little bit and prepare for.
We're seeing that right now in this current environment. Like a crisis, like a pandemic highlights what are the priorities. We know health. It highlights health is always up there, but these are the things we take for granted as well.
Oh, 100%. I think
our relationships, and in your intro and your story, you kept coming back to the value of relationships, which I loved.
Oh, support. I could go on for, hours about relationships and what they've meant, but and how important those things are and how you treat people. I mean, that's the simple basics of life. But again, back to the adversity part, like COVID, this is a great example. I mean, this is, whatever your beliefs are, whether that's God or spirituality in any sense or the universe, something is telling us, like, we got to figure it out, because we've been trying to make life as easy as we can. And this is a great challenge for us. And again, to come back to what truly is important, and we'll be better coming out of it. It's like your garden being pruned, and it's going to grow. And that's, for me, going through adversity as a coach, like, it made me really take stock. Is this what I'm supposed to do? And is this who I am? And I knew I needed to grow. I needed to get better. And I look back, the coach I am today compared to 4 years ago is night and day. Whereas the 6 years I spent in Merritt, we had relatively a lot of success there. And I don't know that I grew as much because it was very challenging, but I didn't have any real hit the rock bottom type of events there. So. Right.
Well, and I know I've found that in the adversity, I learn more from the failures or adversity, and failure and success are just results. It's not really a failure if you learn from it. And even with the adversity with the current pandemic, one thing I hope for society and, the global community at this stage is that we look at this and learn some lessons that make us better. And one thing I've seen, in talking, with you for the past few years and, and just sharing your story, and I know this myself, is, when we go through that adversity, our character and priorities, everything gets changed and honed. And if we learn from whatever the challenges, mistakes, whatever we want to say, that ultimately makes us better and sets us up for greater things in the future. But if we wallow in it, and because you've been in the high performance side, you get, whether it's players who get injured and lose everything they think they've been fighting for up to that point, to, losing and we know coaches are hired to be fired. They're going to be the fall people. More often than not, they're the ones that can save face for owners and, the higher level management, and they're the separation between the players. And so you're caught in that middle, and it's the middle that tends to get the squeeze. And
I think there's always that, and I for the longest time after I was let go in Kootenay, I always used the ownership thing as my go-to when someone would say, "Oh, what happened?" And, "Oh, there was an ownership change." But in reality, like, we weren't good. So it was time to start owning that. And yeah, there's other factors, but I don't control those other factors.
Right.
And for me to use them as an excuse wasn't helping me get better, wasn't helping me grow. So
right.
I started to own that about, I needed to improve and change. And that's what I looked at in these, and especially with the para. Yeah. They made a choice. Like, I'm going to sit here and be miserable and complain about my situation, or I'm going to transform who I am and have this passion. And, I see a lot of our players and players that I've worked with who have been successful as consistently high level performers. They've had something happen in their past that's, whether that is, a divorce, whether that is, the death of a loved one, a family member, a father, like guys who've dealt with real life stuff at a young age, man, they're outperforming their peers on another level because they get that. And
there's a higher order purpose.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when they get injured, they take the time to find ways to get better. And that's right now.
Yeah.
I hear that people saying all the time about this being in, it's like Groundhog Day. Every day is the same over and over. But what we forget about is in Groundhog Day, at one point he made a choice to get better.
Yes.
Start helping people and learning languages and doing these things. And then next thing you know, there you are. So we choose this kind of dead time, alive time type of mentality. And, I think, again, we have to allow people to go and struggle. And as a parent, that's really hard. But I think that's what we're understanding is help prepare people for that path and not, prepare the path for them. And that's something that I continue to try and reinforce with not just my athletes, but with my kids.
That's excellent. And, when I reflect on the path, like, had Kootenay not happened, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to go to the Olympics. And the reality is, whether you're a coach or an athlete, there is very few people in the course of history that get to go and participate in the Olympics as an athlete or coach. And no one will ever take that away. And it took literally something that originally seemed to be an adversity that set up that opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. And the chance to go to the Paralympics was one thing, and we were 28 seconds from a gold medal. Like there's another crushing blow as far, but the lessons that I learned from those people far outweighs and trumps the opportunity to go and experience that. And and I feel for those guys because, again, they spent 4 years preparing for that, and to be 28 seconds away from winning, that's crushing. But selfishly for me, my gold medal was like the day I met those guys. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and I know right now here in Kamloops, with the Olympics this summer getting postponed in Tokyo, we have, Greg Smith, who's, depending on when you look, number 1 or 2 in the world as Paralympian in shot put. And, that delay, that would be tough because the level of sacrifice, not just for the 4 years in between and, the preparation and the work, that dedication and that, but, it starts long before that. So,
Yeah, it's tough for those. I think, again, And especially for guys that create that like, that's how they identify themselves. Right. And that's
Right.
a lesson I've learned through it all is if you really tie yourself to that and without, creating something else in your identity of who you are, whether that's a firing or postponement or an injury, it's going to be tough to overcome. Right. So hopefully for a lot of those athletes and people, they've had, good support groups that can help them with, working their way through that.
Right. And we see, elite level performers, whether it's sport or even in business, that they tie their identity to the thing they do vocationally. And, you're in the athletic field and sports or hockey, and with pro athletes, we were talking before the show today about my buddy Dave Class, who's the chaplain for the Canucks and the BC Lions, which are both professional teams. And he talks about the void. And we see that if someone gets an injury and can no longer play the sport, they've worked in many cases like 20, 30, 40 years, and then their career's over and something out of their control. It's just circumstantial. And, or we see people who get this highest level of success they can vocationally. They get all the money in the world, go out and buy this stuff. And no matter what they achieve, no matter what they're getting and, and mentally, physically, they're specimens. But at that spiritual level, there's something missing, like in the essence, and there's always a void. It's never good enough. So this identity piece being tied to what we do, and I think it's even stronger with elite level performers, definitely A personalities, but elite level performers, because you're used to having sunshine blown up, the wazoo.
Well, I mean, ego thrives, right? When we're good at stuff and trying to control that monster a little bit. I mean, it's a paradox of that. Like, you need it to have success, but it can also be the detriment to, any sort of happiness beyond your, whatever your profession is. Like you said, whether that's Steve Jobs or, LeBron James. I mean, the high performers they're driven by that. And, for me, my personal journey through that, like, I know when I left in Cranbrook, like I didn't know if I wanted to keep coaching, but yet part of me was like, I don't know what else, like, everybody thinks this is what I am. And what would I tell people if I'm not coaching hockey anymore? And
right.
That, you tie yourself to that. That's who they know you as, and a successful one. I was coach of the year at 28, right? So you continue to go back and say, like, I'm not supposed to be bad at this, and yet I am, or I did have a failure. And so, that's a really hard part. That's what drove me to do some other things. And it's a whole nother topic to get into the, my work with Hockey Gives Blood and nonprofit there and Canadian Blood Services. But that's been an amazing opportunity for me to just fill some other purpose outside of the game. And, again, going back to serving people and helping. But the biggest lesson from that was, about being a father. And, I want to be a dad that also contributes to his local community and just happens to be a hockey coach and not the other way around. So this has been phenomenal to spend this time with my kids homeschooling, being essentially forced into that. It's been an amazing opportunity. And again, I think it allows you to realize that you're having an impact and, what your high performance identity is. Absolutely.
Well, and, you've said so much there. One thing I'd like to hear is, this now yourself, but as a leader, especially of young men who are on the cusp of, they're now in a level of the top, probably 2% in the sport. And they're looking to go to that top 1%ers, to the pros, to the NHL. Those athletes that you're dealing with, and or even with your own kids, because you have 3 boys, I imagine they're, and every boy wants to be like their dad, right? So you're going to be having conversations with them, and sometimes it's going to be, say an athlete that gets an injury and maybe they were, running to win the scoring title or something. What sort of conversation do you have with them when part of that identity is they're seeing that? What would you say to someone who finds himself in that position?
Yeah, that's a great.
Or even before they find themselves in that position.
Well, I think that's the key, right? Is trying to, and this is what, when this happened, our season was shut down. We were just getting ready to load the bus to head to Lethbridge. A huge game for us. And it was emotional for our guys. And then we were about 3 days where it was uncertain, and then we brought everybody in, and it was like, hey guys, we're sending everyone home. It's done. And just disbelief, right? And I remember a few of the guys that were really emotional, and I talked to them about, like, hey, this is a reminder for us, like, be where your feet are and live in this moment. And the year before that, we had a player who had suffered another injury. He'd had an injury riddled kind of year before. He was really excited about having a healthy season, and such a great kid and person, and he was just so devastated. And I remember him and I sat down for coffee, and I think part of it is being honest and being truthful. Like, this sucks, and there's nothing you can do about that.
Absolutely.
But then let's move on. Like, feel sorry for yourself for a day or 2 or a week, whatever you need. But now let's get going here. And whether that is trying to find perspective, and I use the story of my experience with para, and perspective is everything. But then also telling them, like, you can look at this as a negative, or look at it, here's a great opportunity for me to get better at something. And your teammates are out every day working on the ice, like, they're dead tired. You have an opportunity here to be fresh. Maybe it's a great opportunity to read some books and grow mentally, work on aspects of your game that you can't do while you're so busy with your season. So, yeah. And the same thing, right? For kids, kids are so resilient. It's crazy. And I don't know where we lose that, right? Like, my kids, like, their whole world is upside down when this happens, and you wouldn't even know. Like, they just move on and keep going, and they figure it out, and here everybody else is stressed. And a kid, like, oh, park's closed today. Okay, I'm going to go dig a hole. Like, just move on.
Yeah. Yeah, as children, we know how to make our own fun, and it's the little things. When our kids were babies, you'd get a gift or whatever, you open up the box. What are they playing with?
Yeah, the paper.
They're playing with the paper in the box. They're not playing with a gift, right? It's, there's a lot that can be learned there. So love that.
Well, I think because they're naturally joyous people, right? Like, they natural disposition to be happy, and the world makes that harder for us as we age, I think, but we've got to try and get back to that. And I think, again, to be able to talk to athletes and people about it's what you've done leading up to that, developing that trust with them so that you can have that difficult conversation. And because if you haven't built that connection with them, and then you try and say, oh, don't worry about it, like, you got to do that, they're like, all of a sudden, so just, again, the relationships and that we talked about at the beginning, and building those early so that you can help walk them through these times, because they're inevitably going to happen.
Absolutely. And, one thing, when you're talking about how you have a conversation and the perspective piece, one thing that elite level performers have is real strong mindsets, and they work real hard on the mental game, getting in the zone, because before you get to that elite level, your skill set, be it physical and the technical talent, is pretty much built, and that becomes kind of a finite tweaking. And then it becomes a mindset piece at probably the dub, and then, at pro, moving up to that next level. And that can be the separator. And we see that with Cinderella teams, right? They just come together. It's that it factor that's something internal. But so everyone that, you know, is maybe caught in this identity trap, you talked about, you know, reframing and it's changing their mental representations, because a big part of coaching and high performance is the development of the mental representations of what's possible and leading them into the next level, which, you know, pushing through, getting to, and that becomes a new baseline, and you keep rolling up. So your level of performance keeps getting higher and higher. But when that's lost, you're having to change the mental representation. And for them, talking about mindset, it comes down to that. You're literally having to make choices in terms of mindset and reframing. And sometimes, as we know, growing up, typically that's a parent or some other mentor or guardian that had a huge influence in our lives that helped us through those challenging times and, you know, reframing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think reminding them that, you know, your performance or your play is a reflection of your life.
Yeah.
In your life. It's not the other way around. Like so many, I think any high performance, again, not just athletes, but corporate and business world too. It's, well, if I can just reach this level, I'll be happy. And then everything's fine. If I can just score tomorrow, everything will be okay. But it's really not. It's, you have to have your life kind of, you know, all those different pieces, whether that's your, you know, mentally, your spiritual, your relationships with, you know, whether that's girlfriends, husbands, wives, whatever that is.
Yeah.
They've got to be heading in the right direction, and then you'll see that reflection in your performance. But I think we flip that, like you said, reframe. We've got to change that a little bit and make sure that we understand, you know, the chicken and the egg concept with that. So
absolutely. And I know early on, you know, in my learning and experience and, you know, high performance sport, or even in the business side and the research I did, it's focused heavily on that skill set and the mindset. But really, you know, and you know this, it comes down to that other side, which is kind of that it factor. We talk about team spirit. Well, there's a spiritual level, you know, it's, people can call it corporate culture. It's the ethos of a team, basically. And that's, you know, and then what are those kind of core beliefs and values? Because those that are more grounded, you know, spiritually and relationally, the identity trap is going to be less of an issue for them. And then the other piece is relationally. And the reason I can say that is you can have all the skill set, all the mindset, and if you don't have anyone to share it with relationally, that's a shallow win at best, and they're still unhappy. There's going to be a void. And the same goes if there's not a grounding. This is where people who are seemingly on the surface ultra successful and have it, you know, crumble because they don't have that spiritual level groundedness. And you see, you know, outwardly, we think they're uber successful, but they might be on their third or fourth marriage and they're disenfranchised from their children. It's, you know, we see all these drug abuse, you know, and we see that in sport when people leave too, right?
Well, there's no question. I think you see it's people that just can't leave it. And then, you know, we're seeing a lot of people that we perceive as being very successful that struggle, you know, mental health wise. And then there's no time than now, right? And that's where a lot of things are challenging right now especially for coaches, because like the world these guys are growing up in is so challenging for them that some of the things that are so critical to success just aren't natural because they're so protected. And, you know, the culture of social media, like, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit later too, like vulnerability, like that's non-existent for them because you can't be vulnerable in a social media environment. Like, you know, think about for us growing up prior to all that stuff, we were still pretty guarded, and now your whole life is on display. And I feel for them. And if that's what you tie your identity to your successes or your performance or those things, like you're you're headed down a tough road at some point, and you just hope that, they're surrounded by people that can help them through those. And, I feel for these guys, like they're just not a naturally trusting group either, and I don't think we can blame them for that, because that's our society. Like, look at our institutions right now. And
they grew up. Part of that is people were teaching them that. So whether it's, agents who are blowing the sunshine, this is everything, you've got this, and, created.
And then inevitably that never usually comes through, right?
Yeah.
We live in the world for high performers of any type. I mean, where there's headhunters, there's all, and everyone's telling them how great it's going to be at this place. You should come here because we're the best at this, or you should come here because you're going to win a championship, or you're going to play on our first line. And usually when you land there, it's never what you thought it was or what you were told it was. So that just erodes trust immediately.
And this has been your big area of research here recently, and learning is around trust and high performance.
Well, trying to build it. I mean, it's so challenging.
Yeah.
It's just like times where you feel like you're beating your head against the wall, but it takes time. And I wanted to get to the root of like, what's going on here? Like, I'm an honest guy. I'm a pretty easygoing guy. Like, why do they think I'm an agenda of some type, right? Like, I'm here to help you. That's my ultimate goal. That's my job. And yet they're so protective, right?
And I think men, all athletes, the vulnerability, like you can't show a weakness, right? Because your opponent will capitalize on the weakness. We know that. I mean, as coaches, you're watching game tape and looking for that gap or the weakness in the other team or other player, and to leverage that. So that makes sense. But, where do we transition to this level of trust? Like, what are some things that you found successful at this stage in your learning, and where do you feel more time and learning needs to be spent? Because this is an area I know both in elite level sport, but also in the corporate, the trust factor is a big deal. This trust in leadership and performance is one of the number one things right now.
Well, yeah, I've done a lot of, and for me, the simplest way, what I've found, because I think you can dive down this rabbit hole of research to where your head spins. But what I've come back to and really focused in on is just competence and action. And it has to start with competence. Like, you have to show that you're capable of being in the role that you're in, and that your knowledge is there. And if you don't have the knowledge, that you're willing to go and find it. And you have to see that. And then the connection piece then becomes the most critical after that. Like, and if you establish strong connection first, then you can lack in competence in some way, but preferably having that competence and then really, really driving connection. And connection takes a lot of time, and that's repeated action over repeated, especially when you say you're going to do something. This is, for me, my greatest challenge, because I have the greatest intentions of all these things I want to do to help these guys, but they judge you based on whether or not you actually do them. And
right. And I was going to say, the biggest thing I find to accelerate trust is congruency.
Yes.
So rather than what you're saying, they're watching what you're doing. And is there a congruency between what you're saying and asking them to do, or what you're saying you do and what you actually do? And when they see that, there's a congruency. Where there isn't, in that integrity gap, you want to undermine trust. And you can have the trust for years and years and be doing everything perfect, and it takes one time where you fell outside the lines and you're done.
Yeah, the erosion is so fast, right? Like, it takes forever to build. And I think a lot of people don't. I think a lot of us just we don't spend the time to get to know especially when you have a large group of athletes or employees, whatever that is. And for me personally, I've found some success. I'm not perfect in any stretch, but I've found some success in finding other relatable topics, whether they like fishing or whatever, then using analogies and digging in a little more that way. And then again, but I have to constantly catch myself where I'm not overpromising and underdelivering for them, because I have all this intention. I want to give you this, and I want to spend this time going through that or this skill or whatever that is. But then reality happens, and I'm sitting there going, well, I meant to, and for them, they experience you as like, this guy's a liar. So there goes that trust. So again, the first step for people though, I think is not, we got to understand that we've done this as a society. It's not their fault, right? Like, again, you watch our leaders and our politicians, no matter what spectrum you're on, it's embarrassing. And nobody wants to take any accountability for anything. And so why should they trust people? So yeah, it takes time. It takes a lot of time.
It does. And, I think, one of the things you'd said is, you've had some success, but you aren't perfect. And, none of us walk on water, unless it's frozen. And for a guy who's, in a hockey rink all the time, you get to walk on water from time to time because it's frozen all the time. But there's not too many people.
I remember a
that can
great
say
one
that.
too, that I was told that the last guy that was perfect, they hung him on a cross. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm aware of that story. Excellent. Well, we're kind of winding down here. I want to hear from you in terms of your own, you've been a high performer, whether it was when you were playing junior to coaching to, running your family and the Olympics. What are some of your personal high performance habits, that you feel lead to you being in the arena to put yourself in with the elite level success?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it takes a lot of, I think, reflection of that. And I've spent some time on that recently because I think it's relevant to trying to help others. The number one for me is energy, and I've tried to be an energetic person, and sometimes it's, trying to make that energy more positive and more focused, but it comes in many different ways. Some guys, whether that's passion or dedication, or for some energy is just loving what they do. But reflecting on a lot of the guys I've been around recently, they all have this natural energy to do what they do. And very few high performers are miserable people about their job or sport. And there are miserable people that play at this level. Like,
there's some very famous miserable coaches.
Yes. And I think to be a sustained high performer, achiever, like you have to enjoy it. There's going to be times, obviously, it's not great, but bringing that energy to what you do. And for me, that's always one I, have to continually find ways to refill my energy, but bring it, to the table when I'm in the arena.
Excellent. So what are some of the ways you find it?
Well, surrounding yourself with people that are energy givers, right? Like, reduce that time around. I love the John Gordon, like the energy boss concept. Like, it's just so relevant, the energy vampires, and it's just trying to weed those people out. And my kids are phenomenal sources. They're like fountains of energy. And my wife is amazing because she's grounded in the sense, like, she doesn't know what the score was most nights that we play, because she has a, life beyond the game that it reminds me, like, okay, I'm not that important. But
it's funny you say that. I heard a story because, and you're never famous until you're at least 100 miles outside your circle, because everyone within, your close bubble, knows you, oh, you're so-and-so's dad. Right.
Yeah.
So going back to the identity, like your identity's different, with your kids, that like, they're like, even to this stage, my wife still sometimes struggles to explain what it is I do in that. And,
well, yeah, you're 100% right. And I think that's really important. It used to bother me because I used to be like, why aren't you, riding this wave like right here? But then I realized that it's a give and take, because if they ride the wave when you're going up, well, when you're going down, they're going to be going down too. And if they can just stay neutral, then they hold you from getting too high. And then when you hit, they're like, hey, it's just life. So I laugh because it used to bother me when we'd be on the road for 10 days and I'd call home and she's like, where are you? I'm like, don't you look at our schedule? I'm on the way to Brandon, Oh, okay. But now I'm like, that's perfect. That's what I need. I need that neutral pole.
Yeah.
To me, that's, those are great sources of energy. And then obviously
and grounding.
Yeah.
Grounding.
Yeah, for sure. My other big key, I think, is vulnerability, which is another area that I've spent some time just trying to figure out a little more about, because I think we talked about it a little bit about this age group and how challenging it is for them to be vulnerable, and what our expectations and what social media, the glaring light that's on them, and how perfect they're supposed to be. But, the natural human response to vulnerability is usually empathy, right? So if you're willing to put yourself out there a little bit, and people will usually recognize that and be empathetic and see you more as human. And
not only that, it takes a hell of a lot more strength to actually allow yourself. It's actually a show of strength, because it takes more strength and courage to make yourself vulnerable or allow yourself to go there. And actually the benefits of doing that versus trying to fake or mull over it, it gets exposed. I'm sorry, short-term or long-term, it will get exposed. Not only that, I think of the example of, winning, my wife or a woman's heart, right? It's not going to be, oh, I'm so strong. It's going to be those things where, when people fall in love, it's when they see some of those vulnerabilities and, that true authentic self, when we don't have to put on some of those masks and, expectations that society has placed as important. And I get that there is times where, showing a weakness, if it's sport, that, there's contextual pieces, but when it comes to character and behavior, vulnerability, 99% of the time is actually your strength. But I'd love to hear your thought.
No, 100%. You hit a great point. And I think in Brown's research on this, she makes a great point about, again, a paradox of vulnerability and courage. And you can't do anything courageous without being vulnerable.
You have to step out of your comfort zone to grow.
Yeah. And then there's nothing that's vulnerable that doesn't take courage. So those two are synonymous and require one another. And so but I think for us to try and get performers and athletes to understand that, it just all comes back in a full circle to the trust piece. you have to be able to encourage that environment. And we have a hard time with that. Like you said, in a macho environment that is sport, we don't really encourage to foster that vulnerability. We don't live that because we don't want to show our weaknesses either. So that's it's a really interesting one. But I think the guys that I've seen performing at the highest level, they're okay with being, hey, I suck there. And what that turns into, and all of these things, they all lead to that growth mindset, right?
Absolutely.
It's about being a learner, not a knower. And for guys that are willing, the guys who come in and want to know everything and tell you how much they know everything, they're probably going to plateau pretty early. So that would be a big one. And then I think the last one for me is, I love that they've termed it grit now, but it was always just resiliency and adversity and
perseverance and
work ethic and all that stuff. But all of those just combine into having that growth mindset and understanding that you're going to fail. You don't know everything, right? And in order to kind of work your way through all those things, you need to have an endless supply of energy and determination that's,
and those 1 to 2 percenters, that make it to the elite level, they didn't give up too quick, and they didn't give up easy, and they didn't give up too quick. Yeah. Because we've all seen examples of people who were less talented and that stayed in, whatever the arena they're in long enough and persevered, whereas people, the minute they hit, an obstacle or a challenge or something, they're out, because everyone wants, we start with these big, huge dreams and forget it. And, I think that's part of it. And that was, my burning questions. And when I came down to why everyone doesn't achieve elite level success, it's really 2 things. They give up too easy or too quick.
And I think it comes back full circle to my opening comments about being from a small town and almost having this naive ignorance of like, I didn't realize all the people I was competing against, so it never intimidated me. Right. But some people who come from a bigger center, say working in the sport that I was in, they would look around at this, oh my gosh, like, look how good all these guys are. I'm never going to make it. For me, I was like, I don't.
Yeah.
So that's where I learned that. And then where it changed again, when I did head to Kootenay as that youngest coach, as a very, promoted and recognizable kind of name now, I felt.
Well, and in Kootenay, the head coach for the Kootenay Ice, like, that entire community goes out to watch a game. Like, everyone knows
and I just,
coach.
Yeah, and their legacy of success and all the things they've done. And I really tried to be something I wasn't by following this norm that people thought you were supposed to be. So I was protecting myself from being vulnerable. I didn't learn a lot there because I wanted to try and be a knower, and I wasn't. And it was, I had to go back to that ignorant, naive way of the small town mentality that I had. And I'm back there now, I feel, and just take as much knowledge as I can. I need to simplify it sometimes because I get it gets too convoluted, but loving doing this and having the opportunity to come and do this with you has really made me have to kind of put some things in some boxes and understand what areas I should focus a little more on. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. Now, I have one last question, and I'm going to give you some forced adversity, Luke. But you're going to like this. So the question you thought was coming is not coming. I'm going to change the question.
Oh, so you mean this was all pre-rehearsed? You weren't supposed to tell me?
No. Here we go. So if we're looking years down the road after you've played out the career in that, and somehow you've been given this tremendous gift, you're uber wealthy, like $50 billion, you have perfect health, you and your family. So literally time, money, and health can't hold you back. There's technically nothing to hold you back. What would you do? And you can't just go live your life like a rock star. What would you do if time, money, health could not hold you back?
Time, money, health.
What's the ultimate contribution you want to make, and what do you think your legacy will be?
Well, I think the greatest legacy for me is creating a legacy of good citizens, whether that's my children or other people you come into contact with. So I've really enjoyed, again, this work I've done with Hockey Gives Blood has allowed me to help contribute in a way to our community. And I think that's something that we've lost, our volunteerism and those types of things we're just not as active in. So there would be no shortage of areas I would give my money to, just to help, our and I wouldn't just throw it to people who are needy, because I think people need to earn their way through some things. And
a hand up versus a handout.
For sure. Yeah. Like give people programs that they can earn and work through, but just provide them those tools and resources. There's no question that I would lavish my own immediate family, and my wife's and make sure that we were comfortable with and reconnect with getting out to the outdoors again I was so fortunate to grow up, where I did and experience the outdoors and fishing and all those things that I think made me more grounded. So have an opportunity to go live somewhere like that and really just hopefully people would say that, I provided them an opportunity to not prepare them for that path, not
Absolutely.
create the path for them. So,
well, and one thing I'd love if you can send me a link to Hockey Gives Blood.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I know you have a passion for that. I'll share it as a link on here, so people who want to donate or volunteer, I know that that's something that has grabbed your heart and will be one of those. It's that sort of thing that I see probably continuing as you continue to develop and get blessed, you and your family, through, the work you currently do, but also going forward. And I know you and I have talked about, at the developmental level, you've been at the top levels now, but there's this need to probably go deeper, and you do lots of work with Hockey Canada. And I know that that's something that they're looking at, and, that need to help with some of those issues early on and to bring the fun into it, but also help prepare them with some of that resiliency and, get rid of some of this softness that, somehow has creeped in,
Yeah, and giving them opportunities, and we've had some great stuff with players that are doing things outside of the game now and using their influence and their reach on social media for good causes, instead of just kind of the vitriol that is consistent there. So we can complain about things all we want, but finding ways to make use of them in a positive manner is really important, I think.
Absolutely. And, giving players or people the opportunity, to volunteer, whether it's Children's Hospital and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That changes those children. It changes the pro players. I know in talking with Trevor Linden, once we were at an event together that he was keynoting, and he was talking about how going to BC Children's Hospital and the impact that had the first time. Like, he can still remember that first day. And, I think of, the day in 2008 when I was in India at the, in the shantytown doing the medical clinic. There's those life-changing things where it's not about us anymore. And I think elite level performers, it's always about you to, get there, and you're having to be a little selfish, but also sacrificing. But at the end of the day, our time here, and, even the time where you're the elite level in whatever it is really short in a relative. So
our existence is a very small blip. And I think if we get too caught up in trying to be perfect throughout that, we're not going to enjoy it very much. So I think continuing to just try and be good citizens and on a daily basis treating people the right way. I mean, I don't know if there's a better lesson for anybody.
And I think that's the perfect way to end this today. And I appreciate it. I think this might be our longest podcast yet. And we've covered the gamut here, buddy. And I really appreciate your time. I'm glad we connect. Looking forward to when you're able to get back to Merritt and we can connect and, get our families together, because I know you have a young family like I do. So
sounds good, Corey. I appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. And thank you very much, Hop Nation, for listening in. Looking forward to connecting with you next week.